Hey guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to be taking a look on how to perform 4 very common actions when working with Subversion in your repositories and working copies. And that's going to be how to create or add files, how to update your files, how to commit changes, and how to delete files. Now we're going to be taking a look on how to do all of these actions through the command line first. So let's go ahead, open up our command prompt, and we're just going to cd into our command line 1 folder, which is in users/RyanZach, which is the user I'm logged in as, desktop, and then command line 1. Whoops. Obviously I spelled something wrong. Yep, there we go. And if we take a look at what's inside here, we have nothing inside here. This is still at revision 0. And now the first thing we want to do is we want to set up our basic directory structure that we're going to be using for this repository. Now we're going to be using a very common directory structure known as the branches, tags, trunk structure, and it's basically going to allow us to have a folder, 3 folders. One folder is specifically designed to have any branches be put in them. We have another folder designed for any tags to be put inside of them, and then we have the trunk folder, which is going to hold the main line of development for our project. So in order to create these directories, we're going to use the make directory command, and then we're going to create branches, tags, and trunk. And we can create multiple directories with one command, or one call to the make directory command, just by separating the directories by spaces. Click enter. We take a look inside here. We now have our branches, our tags, and our trunk directory inside the command line 1 folder. So now if we want to be able to mark these directories as something that should go into the repository when we commit, we need to mark these for addition. And the way we mark a file or a folder for addition is we use the SVN utility and we use the add command. And then we're going to pass it what we want to add. And just like with make directory, where we had branches, tags, and trunk in the same command, in the one command, we can add multiple files or folders with the same command, separating them by spaces. So we can do branches, space tags, space trunk. Click enter. You'll notice we have those 3 items, branches, tags, and trunk, and each one of them has an A next to it, and that just signifies that these 3 items are now marked for addition when we commit to our repository next. So now that we've added these to our working copy, if we want to commit these, we'd use the SVN utility, and we use the commit command. Now if I go ahead and I just hit enter, it's going to give me an error saying that the commit failed. And the reason it failed is that there is no message associated with this commit. We didn't pass the dash message or -m, and we haven't set up the environment variable SVN editor in order to pop up an editor in order to enter our comment in. And whenever you commit something, Tortoise or SVN itself is going to require you give it a message. You can give it an empty message if you like, but it still needs to be given. Now instead of having to remember to go ahead and do the -m and then pass the message every time we do a commit, what we're going to do is we're going to set up that SVN editor environment variable so that anytime we do a commit, it's automatically going to open up an external editor, and we're going to use Notepad. Now in order to set that up, we're going to go ahead, go into our control panel, go into System, go to Advanced System Settings, Environment Variables. Now let's just go, hold on, let's bring this open. This is our System Properties. Go to Environment Variables. And now we could add this for user RyanZach, the user currently logged into Windows, or we could add this as a system-wide variable. Let's just add it as a system-wide variable, call it SVN editor, and it's going to be Notepad. So anytime we do a commit, if we don't pass a message, it's going to open up Notepad, and we'll be able to use Notepad in order to enter our message for our commit. Okay, just click OK and close out all of these. Now remember, whenever we make a change to an environment variable, in order for that change to take effect, we need to restart the command prompt. So let's go ahead, close out the command prompt, and open up a new one. Let's go back into our command line 1 folder, which again is in users, the username you're currently logged in as, desktop, and then we have command line 1. Once again, I misspelled something. Okay. take a look at directories. We have those 3 files. Now if we do SVN commit, this will now give us it won't return an error, it will open up our notepad. But before we actually commit this, there's one particular option that we can pass to this command that we do want to pass right now, and that's no auth cache. And what this is telling the SVN is that when you commit this, if it requires an authentication and it collects an authentication, which it will, we don't want to cache that, so the next time we do a commit, it's going to ask us to re-authenticate ourselves. And the only reason we're doing this is because we're trying to simulate 2 different users to the same repository on the same computer. And when SVN caches a authentication, it caches an authentication for the actual repository, not for the directory. So if in command line 1 I commit and I authenticate myself as user 1, when I go into command line 2 and I try to commit something, it's actually going to authenticate me as user 1. Unless I pass this no authent cache, because at that point it's not going to cache it. But the reason that the cache is going to, or that command line 2 will authenticate me as command line 1 if I authenticate with command line 1 in the command line 1 folder, is that it doesn't store these on a directory basis or a working copy basis. It stores it on a repository basis. And since both command line 1 and command line 2 are connected to the same repository, it would use the same authentication cache for authenticating itself. So we're going to pass that no authent cache parameter, hit enter. Notice how we didn't get an error this time. This time it showed us, it opened Notepad for us. And if we take a look at what's shown in Notepad, on the second line we have this line and those below will be ignored. And this is basically just a indicator of what you're about to commit to the repository. So you can see we're going to be adding our trunks, branches, and tags folder. And here we can just say setting up basic directories. Click close and hit save. And you notice now that it's going to ask me to authenticate myself. And the reason for that is that when we set up this repository, we said anonymous users can read, but only authenticated users can actually write. Now the reason it's asking me to authenticate myself and it's asking for a password for Ryan Zek is that it automatically tries to log into the repository as the user you logged into Windows as. Since I logged into Windows as Ryan Zek, the Ryan Zek user, that's what it's going to try to authenticate as. However, we didn't create a Ryan Zek user, so all we need to do in order to enter in the username we want to authenticate as is we can hit enter. And now it's going to ask us for the username since we didn't pass it the password for Ryan Zek. And we're going to, since we're in the command line 1 folder, we're going to use user1, and then we're going to use password1. Okay, let's try that again. User1, password1. There we go. Obviously I typed in my password wrong. And as you can see, it added the branches, tags, and trunk, and it committed that to revision 1. So if I were to go ahead and do cd up, and let's go into our command line 2, if we use the SVN update command, and what the update command is, it's going to update your working copy to either the head revision or the latest revision of the repository if no revision is passed, or if you want, you can pass a specific revision number with the revision option and then just pass it like 1. And since, like if I pass it 0 and hit update, it's going to say it's at revision 0 because that is the revision we're at currently on our working copy. If I pass a revision 1, it's now going to add those 3 directories, the trunk, branches, and tags, and update to revision 1. So if we go ahead and take a look at what's inside this folder, we have those 3 directories. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a few files to our trunk folder. So we're going to go into our trunk, and we're just going to open up files in Notepad. File1.txt. It doesn't exist, so we want to create it, and this is going to be file 1. Let's close and save. And let's do the same thing for file 2. Create that, and save that as file 2. Save it and close. And now if we want to add these files to the repository, we have to go ahead and use that SVN add command and pass it what we want to add. Again, we can we can add multiple files or directories just by separating them by spaces. Hit enter, and as you can see here, these two items are marked as A, so these two items are going to be added. So when I do my SVN commit, now this time, and for any time further, whenever we use a command that's going to require authentication, we're going to manually pass who we want to be authenticated as. And the way you do that is you do -- username, and then pass it the username. We're going to pass it user2 because we're in command line 2, and then -- password, and then the password for user2, which is password2. And this is essentially going to allow us to simulate multiple users on the same computer. And now you notice I'm not passing the no auth cache, and the only reason I'm not passing that is because I don't want to pass it every time we have to authenticate ourselves, because that's just going to become very tedious. So what's going to happen here is when I commit using username 2 and password 2, it's going to cache user 2 and password 2. However, whenever you authenticate yourself, or whenever you run a command that you need authentication, if you manually pass the username and password options, it's going to use those options over what's ever stored inside the cache. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to bring up my notepad again. You can see those two files, and we can just give a comment of adding files, close and save. It added those two files, it transmitted the file data, and it committed it to revision 2. So if I go back into my command line 1 folder, and I do SVN update, and I'm not going to pass a revision number because I want to update to the latest revision, you notice it says it added file 2 and file 1. So if I cd into trunk, and I take a look at the directory, I have those two files. Now the last two things we want to be able to do is we want to be able to delete a file, and we also want to be able to update a file. Now to delete a file, we're going to use the SVN utility, and we're going to use the delete command, and then we're just going to pass it what file or files we want to delete. We want to delete file 2. Click OK. You can see here file 2 has been marked for deletion with this D, and then if we want to update a file, all we need to do is modify the file itself. So let's open up file 1 in the text editor. Let's just add a -updated. Close this and save. So now if I do an SVN commit, let's go ahead and authenticate myself as user 1 because I'm in the user 1 folder, and that's password 1 or password 1. Just make sure that's correct. That looks good. I'm going to hit enter. You're going to notice we have the two files that the two changes that we're committing. We have the file 2.txt, which has a D, which means it's marked for deletion. And then we have the file 1.txt, which is marked as M, which is marked as modified. So here I'm going to just say updating and deleting files as my comment. I'm going to close and hit save. It's going to transmit that data, and now we're at revision 3. So if I go ahead and cd back into my command line 2 folder, and I do my SVN update, here we can see that the file 2.txt was deleted, marked as D, and our file 1.txt was updated, marked with a U. And if I cd into my trunk, take a look in here, I should only see the file 1, which I do, and then if I go ahead and open up file 1 with Notepad, it's the updated version. So this covers all the actions as far as creating and adding files, updating files, deleting files, and committing your changes from your working copy to the repository on the server. And this has all been done through the command line utilities. Next, we're going to take a look at how to do the same exact actions, however we're going to use Tortoise SVN instead. So we're going to go ahead and close our command prompt, and now we're going to go into our Tortoise 1 folder. And before we do that, as these icons appear, we're going to go over what they mean. But you'll notice that these 4 folders have a little icon in the lower left-hand corner of the actual icon itself, and this is basically an indicator from Tortoise SVN that these particular folders or files are current, or they haven't been modified since you've last done a checkout or an update from the repository. So this is just letting you know that this folder doesn't have any changes to the working copy of the files since you've last updated. So you go ahead, go inside here. Now what we want to do is we want to add in those three directories, the branches, tags, and trunk. So let's go ahead and add those 3 directories. Oops, not that. Tags, and then trunk. Now we've added our 3 directories that we want to commit to our repository. Now there are 2 different ways we can add files when using Tortoise SVN. Just shrink that up a little. And the first way is we can right click on the directory or the file, hover over the Tortoise SVN option, and then we can click Add. Click OK, and OK. And now this trunk has been marked for addition when you commit your changes from your working copy to the repository next. And you can see there are 2 new icons that have showed up. The first one is this little plus icon on the trunk folder. And this icon indicates that this particular file or directory is going to be added when you next commit your changes to the repository on the server. You also notice back here our Tortoise 1 folder now has an exclamation point, and that's surrounded by red. And this is letting us know that this particular folder has changes since you've last updated, which means that you have changes you might want to commit, or you might want to revert changes, but it's just letting you know that there's something different in this folder since you've last updated. Now the second way we can add files to a repository is if we right click in the particular folder that we have files or directories we want to add, and we go to SVN commit. It's going to bring up this little commit window. And you'll notice in the changes made we have our trunk, which is automatically checked, and the text status is added, and that's because we told SVN, or we told the working copy, that we want to add this when we next commit. However, we have branches and tags which are unchecked, and the text status is non-versioned. These are items inside a folder that's managed through SVN that aren't being managed through the SVN. So this folder is connected to the Tortoise SVN repository. However, these 2 items are not being managed through that repository as of yet. Now if we wanted to add these without having to go ahead and click on these files and right click and go to Tortoise SVN and add, what we can do instead is we can just allow the showing of unversioned files, which is this checkbox right here. Notice if I click on this, those 2 files now disappear. So we can click on that, and then we can just check on these particular files. And if you check on a file that's non-versioned, what it's going to do is it's automatically going to add those and then commit. So with this commit command, it's going to first add those 2, add whatever is non-versioned but checked, and then once it's done doing that, it's going to commit all the changes that are marked as changed. And if we go ahead and just take a look at the other things in this commit window, we have the commit to, which is just letting you know this is the repository for the SVN that you're committing to, and we're committing to the Tortoise stored on the local host. We have recent messages, which will allow you to show a history of recent messages you've committed for this particular repository. You can just cancel out of that. This is where we type in that message, so this would be setting up basic directories. We have the changes that are going to be committed. We have that show unversioned files, which allows you to show files that are unversioned. We have the select all or deselect all, which is just a trigger to select everything. So if you have a lot of files and you want to commit them all, you can just go ahead and check that, and it should check them all for you. And then right here we have we have the number of files that are selected and the total number of files that are in this dialog right here, this window right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click OK, and it's going to ask us to authenticate ourselves, and since we're in Tortoise 1, we're going to authenticate as user 1, password 1. Now you can click this checkbox if you want to save your authentication for this particular repository. And while this is pretty common if you're using a private computer, as most of the time you won't need to connect to a repository as multiple users, However, since we are simulating multiple users connecting to the same repository on the same computer, we're not going to save our authentication. We're just going to have to manually enter this in each time. So we'll uncheck that, click OK. And you notice how it added all of those directories to revision 1. So close that out. So if we go ahead and go into here, what we can do is we can either inside this folder without anything selected do SVN update, or we could right click on this folder and do an SVN update. And you notice it's now at revision 1, and it allows us to, it added the trunk, branches, and the tags. Close that out, and we now have our branches, tags, and trunk folder in our Tortoise 2. If we go into our trunk and we want to create those files, let's go ahead and right click. We want to create a new text file. We'll call this file 1, and let's just copy and paste that, and we'll rename this to file 2. And let's just go into each of these files and give it the correct text that we want to put inside of it. File 1 has file 1 in it, and file 2 has file 2 in it. Save those. So now we want to go ahead and we want to add in these 2 files to our repository. So what we need to do first, if we go back here, is we need to go ahead and add those, which we could do through the Tortoise SVN and the add command if we had those files selected, but we're just going to use the shortcut do SVN commit and just check on these boxes. It saves you a little time, so you don't actually have to do the add and then the commit. You basically do both of the actions at the same time, and we can just say adding files. And if we go ahead and hit this recent messages, you'll notice we have that history log of setting up basic directories. And with this recent messages, this is also on a repository basis and not a particular working copy basis. So even though we're in the Tortoise 2 and this particular history, this particular comment was done with Tortoise 1, they both connect to the same repository, so the log messages are going to, no matter whether I do it in Tortoise 1 or Tortoise 2, both of that history is going to be available in either one of those folders. But we'll click cancel because we are adding files. Click OK. It's going to ask me to authenticate myself, and I'm going to authenticate myself as user 2 because we're in the Tortoise 2 folder. It's password 2. Click OK. Yep, obviously I did not authenticate myself correctly. There we go. You can see it added these 2 files, and then it sent the contents, shows what revision it's add. You also notice here at the bottom of when the commit finishes, it shows you how many bytes was transferred, how long it took, and what was added, modified, deleted. As here we had 2 added. So if I go ahead and close this, back into my Tortoise 1, if I right click on branches and I update, it's going to say it's complete, but you notice that it didn't add the files. And that's because when I right clicked on branches, I'm only updating what was in branches, and because nothing changed from revision 1 to revision 2 on branches, it updated to revision 2, but it didn't add anything because our changes was inside trunk. If I go ahead and right click and update on the Tortoise 1 folder, it's going to update everything inside of this folder recursively. And as you can see, file 2 and file 1 was added. You can notice right here it says 2 files were added. And go ahead and refresh. You'll notice sometimes with the icons that Tortoise SVN provides that they sometimes don't automatically refresh when you expect them to. Sometimes you have to go into the folder and then come back out for it to get the actual correct icon. So these little icons can sometimes be a little flaky. But if we go in here, we'll notice we have file 1 and we have file 2. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to be able to delete and update files. Updating a file is very simple. Just go in the file and update it. Save. And now you notice we have that both Tortoise 1 and this file have that red exclamation point, and that's because this is now different from when we did our last update. And then to delete a file, there's 2 different ways you can delete a file. You can right click, go to Tortoise SVN, mark a file as delete, and that's going to delete the file and from your computer, and then when you commit, it's going to automatically delete that particular file from the repository. However, a different way we can do it is that if we just delete the file itself, click yes, go up here, and let's commit our changes to trunk, you notice that there's a text status of missing for our file 2. If I go ahead and check this, it's going to then delete this file from the repository on our server. So we don't actually have to go ahead and again do that whole delete it first and then do an update. We can kind of combine those two different commands into one command with using Tortoise SVN. And we can go ahead and do updating and deleting files. If we open up recent messages, you notice we have the setup basic directories, which was done in this particular working copy, and then that adding files, which was done in the Tortoise 2 working copy. You can go ahead and cancel. So we're going to modify file 1, we're going to delete file 2. If we click OK, it's going to ask to authenticate ourselves. So again, user 1, password 1. You notice here we had modified this and deleted the file 2, modified file 1, and it sent the content for file 1 and completed at revision 3. We've got the same messages in here. We have deleted as 1 and then modified as 1. Click OK. And if we go ahead back into our Tortoise 2 and we do an SVN update, it deleted the file 2 and it updated file 1. So if we go back into trunk, notice how file 2 is no longer there, and if we go into here we have the updated version. We can close that and just close these folders. So this goes everything I wanted to cover as far as creating and adding new files, updating files, deleting files, and then sending any changes you've made on your working copy to the repository on the server. Thanks.